sort of clear that out, because your dashboard should be showing that you should be able to everything that I'm seeing, so that you'll be able to follow along with everything. Okay.
Okay, no problem.
So yeah, thanks. And it's a good thing you raised that, so that many sort of doubts whatsoever, it's very important for us to always go through it. All right. So like I said before, today we're going to be looking at project 3, 4, and 5. I hope we were able to get there. But before I get started, a few other things I'd like to talk about so that we can all be on the same page. Now, don't forget to use the Slack channel for communication, because I'm going to minimize my Zoom right now. Oh, actually, I wasn't recording. Okay, I'll no. One second. Let me Slack, and then Solomon, can you please confirm if you're able to actually do the recording on my behalf? I'd like to know, so that I don't get to worry about hitting the record button, because that messes me up most of the time when I try to do that. Is Solomon on the call? Okay. So Chad is asking how many hours you should study per day. I mean, it's up to you. You can do as many as possible. That's fine. But if you can do minimum of 2 hours a day, that's fine. Okay, 2 hours a day is good. But exceed beyond that, that's perfect. All right, someone is not responding. I wonder if he's hearing me at all. So let me stop sharing so I can hit the record myself.
Recording in progress.
All right, so let me bring up my page again. Welcome again to the DevOps Masterclass. And today we are going to be treating project. Last week we stopped at project 2, I believe. So we're going to start with project 3 today. And project 1, 2, 3, and 4 are actually focused on the different web stacks that people generally use to implement software and technology products. The reason we focus on that is not for you to learn programming language yet. It's actually to understand exactly, or rather, it's for you to understanding what it is that you're going to be doing as a DevOps engineer from level. If you notice from last weekend, it's about deploying some application to some server and making it available for people to use from the browser. So we started with a LAMP stack, which is a combination of Linux, Apache, SQL, and PHP. If you notice, it has a Linux, it has a database tool, which is MySQL, it has a web server. Now we also try out the stack, which is Nginx and PHP. If you notice, it is also a Linux server, which is an operating system. It has the MySQL database, and it also has the programming language. Now, today we're going to start with project 3, which is MERN stack. So MERN stack is MongoDB, Express, and no very soon. But there's a pattern between all of them. They all implement the 3-tier architecture. Okay, and I'm going to talk through it so that you get to understand why we're doing all this. Let me just get this off. Okay, there we go. They all implement the 3-tier architecture, and that is a very important thing to know, because most of the things that you're going to be doing revolves around that. Okay. So let me just go to Google and then we ask Google, what is the three-tier architecture? All right. And let's actually use images so that I just get to read something. Now, what's most important about this is if you notice there's the client, the database server, and the web server. So it's all about having, number one, the client. What's the client? The client is, it could be a web browser, it could be your phone, in the case of a mobile application. It's just the layer that you as the end user get to use to interact with the software that we're talking about, whether it's a web-based software or it's a mobile application. The other part of the tier is the web server, and that's where we deploy the application. So that means there has to be a layer where you interact with the application. Now there has to be a layer where the application itself runs the business logic. So the business logic is where, depending on what the business is about, if it's a financial institution and it's a bank, for example, all they do is they keep people's money. They have to process whatever the business does. So the application that does that lives on some web server that runs the business logic. If it's an insurance company, different things that they do. So they calculate premiums, they calculate risk, they do all sorts of things. These are business logic. If it's in the health sector, they keep patient records. They transfer data all around. They do all sorts of things. They recommend if they have like a pharmaceutical aspect of the hospital, a web interface. They have a place where they do drug recommendation, medicine recommendation, and things like that. That's a business logic. So all of that is encoded into the application code, and the client interacts with that. Now, the third part of the layer is the database layer, where the application gets to store the data that is being retrieved from the client. Or the other way around, it retrieves the data from the database and presents it to the client. So you see that everything we're doing, it doesn't matter which web stack is being decided upon. It's all about the three-tier layer. And once that's been decided in terms of the tech stack, every other thing remains the same. Build an application that has the functionality to interact with the client, then it run the business logic, then it's able to store the data. So don't get lost about, oh, what's all this lamp, and all that that's going on. We haven't actually really started what you'll be doing as a DevOps engineer. We haven't really started. We haven't started doing any automation or anything. But this is like setting the foundation so that you understand why you will be doing things you'll be doing later. Because as a DevOps engineer, remember, it's about helping organizations to enable facilitation between developers and operations team, whereby developers are able to develop their code, and we can seamlessly take that code and make it available to customers. Okay. In a very high level, that's what we do in the world of DevOps. So we use tools and people to ensure that this happens. All right. Now, in the course of doing all of that, we have an infrastructure to look at, whether the infrastructure is on-premise or in the cloud. On-premise meaning a company can decide to have their own physical data center. Remember, I told you data center last week. They can have their own physical data center where buy their servers, install racks and network switches and all that, and they build the three-tier within that. All right. So the application business logic runs in there, the database runs in there, or they decide to use the cloud, which is also similar. So you can have the cloud whereby you rent servers and you have all of that. Now, with DevOps, what you'll be doing eventually is taking that infrastructure, making sure it is available for your application to run, making sure it performs optimally, making sure that it is secure, highly secure, making sure that it's able into whatever volume that you want from the business logic aspect or the database aspect. If there is need to scale because more users coming on platform, there is more clients requests coming to the business application, you're able to scale. And this is where cloud shines. If you're thinking, okay, so why is all this talk about cloud engineering, AWS, and all that in the whole DevOps way? It's just that that is the aspect that makes scalability easy. If you're running your infrastructure on-premise, it's hard to scale because if there is need to buy more servers, you have to plan that. You have to order IBM servers or Dell servers. You have to order, different things. It can take months for delivery to
Recording in progress.
just okay. For example, we store data on databases, right? We have to think about the storage. We have to think about the capacity planning. So if we're expecting our increase by, let's say, 50% or 6 months, then we have to think about how we're going to dynamically store, right? So making up available, making the it's all in helping the business ensure set up by they can say, for example, oh, our application to be running 99.9
Recording in progress.
Get this out of the way. Any questions? Feel free to drop a message in this channel because I have that right in front of me. I can always review it. Okay, so it's time to start in project 3. How many people have actually implemented projects? Some people have already gone up to project 6 already, which is fantastic. So if you have already done project 3, let me know, signify. All right, so with MERN Stack, good, we've done project 3. With MERN Stack, so we have we have XJS, we have React.js, and there's Node.js. So what I'm going to do is I'll just liken all these and just relate them with the 3-tier architecture we talked about just now. Now, the database layer is where MongoDB comes in the picture. So last way we've seen how MySQL works. Today we're going to have a look at MongoDB. MongoDB is another type of database system that helps us to store data. There's reasons why people choose whether to use MySQL or to use MongoDB. Or let me put it this way, there's reasons why people use relational database management system, and an example of that is MySQL. Now, in the case of MongoDB, it is a document-based system. Why do we call it document-based system? It's because it stores semi-structured data, or some people will say semi-structured data, whichever way, it doesn't matter as long as you understand. Relational database management system is more of storing structured data. So that means there's a whole lot of thought and plan that goes into the database itself, the structure of the database before we start storing data into it. We have to create tables. We have to decide what schema of the database is to look like. When we say schema, we're talking about the rows, the columns. We talk about the type of data that will go into it. Is it going to be more string, character, integer, all those kind of things? We have to think about all of that before we start storing data, because that's the way it works. So it's more structured and it has its pros and cons. In the case of MongoDB based database system, it is semi-structured because it doesn't really have a strong structure like the RDBMS, right? So the schema can actually be defined on the fly, and you just pump the data there and it's able to store it. RDBMS is that way. So if your application is the type that requires very, very strict database structure, then you go for that. If it doesn't require all that, then you go for the MongoDB style database. So these are kind of decisions, solutions to decide before they actually embark on developing the action. Then the Express.js is a server-side web application framework for Node.js. Now, let's talk about frameworks. So in the world of software and programming, there are languages, as you know already. Last week we talked about PHP. Now we talk about JavaScript style of programming language. Now, because these programming languages can be very difficult sometimes, and it requires a lot of work for developers to be able to do things. So there are frameworks that people have developed to make their lives easy. Rather than developing something from scratch, the framework already have, you think of it as an organization of functions that can be reused. Okay, so these are frameworks that can then make software development very easy for developers to begin to work with. So in the case of Express, it's framework on top of the Node.js. Now, Node.js itself is a JavaScript environment. So remember, JavaScript is a programming language, okay? And it's used to run JavaScript on a machine rather than in a browser. So traditionally, JavaScript runs in the browser. So as you can see, my web browser right now, which is Chrome, it's the client side. We've talked about the client, the business logic side, and the database side, right? Now, in terms of the client, programs run in there that allows you, the client, you, the user, to interact with the server side things, okay? Now, Node.js is that sort of framework that then allows us to run JavaScript on servers, because traditionally, JavaScript does not run on the servers, it runs in the browser. So this web stack is another stack of web languages that allows us to deploy an application, and they are tightly coupled together to work together. Just like we've used LAMP and LAMP, another stack that people can decide to use and say, hey, we're going to be using MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. And React in this case is front-end web framework. So This was developed by Facebook and it's all script based. The advantage of this is developers who choose to work with this, because they're all based on JavaScript, it's like using the same language both for the front end and the back end. And it makes development easy for people who already have JavaScript knowledge. So as a DevOps engineer, you can be an engineer working within the team whereby what they're working on is a stack like this. So what you would then learn is how to interact with the application so that you can easily deploy it to servers. When there's need to troubleshoot, you understand how to troubleshoot it. When there's need to install libraries for developers, you're able to do that. And we're going to do something today that you get to understand it. You don't have to worry about the code. Our code snippets that we've already put into the documentation. Don't you worry about it, but worry more about understanding how to get it onto the server. Even if you're given a documentation like this to say, put this code on the server, you should know how to organize it. That's what we're going to be doing. Any questions so far? All right. There are a couple of on and read more. So you can see here we've talked about the database management system, and then if you want to practice a bit of a JavaScript, just to have a bit of familiarity with the syntax, you can go ahead and do that. But it's not required at this stage. Just then RESTful API, another thing that you need to have familiarity with. So we'll get to that in a bit. But at the end of the day, it's about how applications communicate with each other. Remember, we talked about 3 tiers. So we have the front end, we have the back end, okay? And we also have database layer. The back end is the business logic, so don't get confused, because I might be using things interchangeably, so it's important you understand, what I'm talking about. Now, the front end needs to be able to communicate with it, and that can happen over RESTful API. So that is another thing that we'll get to see today. And you get to understand how to use certain tools to test your APIs to ensure that they're working as expected. So let's get started. So in order to complete this project, you need an AWS account, which I believe you all have. If you don't have that, you can go back to project 1 and see how that is done. So create EC2 instance, you can tag them. I believe you know what tagging means by now. And that part, we won't delve much about it now. When we start doing some automation things, you'll get to understand more about tagging. Okay, so let's get up an EC2 instance. So I'm already logged into my AWS account. And in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, please let's start digging into that. You can, even if I don't respond to that right away, but post your questions in the Slack channel. All right, so have any running? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, because there's a server we used from the 2, I'm going to use that. What I would do is I'll just launch an instance like it. Sometimes I don't get to remember how things launch more like this. Okay. And instance type. So I have issues with because this instance type has just CPU and 1 gig of RAM. What I would do is I'll go for a T2 medium, so we don't struggle with with performance. All right, I'll leave everything and I'll use an existing group. So there is an existing security group that traffic open to all, which is fine for us. Let's review and launch. I'm going to reuse this key. I believe everyone still have access to log on to the server. You can do that. Just in case I need some help and I need you guys to run some command me. Okay, so it's 3. All right, so let's connect this. It's showing the private IP. We don't have
Instance is not running yet.
Yeah.
Instance is not running yet.
Yep. Thank you. So we have to wait for the public IP to come up. Actually running. So maybe there's something wrong with the way we configured the.
It's still initializing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Let's refresh that. But I actually expect it to already have an IP address associated with it, because this is initializing is more of running some commands within the server. Let's see. Get system log. Shouldn't take this long at all.
Should we refresh the entire page?
No, something wrong, definitely. So what I would do is let me try to create a completely new one and not use the existing configuration. And you see the beauty of the cloud? You can literally just do anything you like. You know, Ubuntu. Imagine I have to buy a physical set. Okay, so let's see. Imagine what I need is actually 100 servers. All I need to do is just put a figure. And I get 100 servers to do what I need. Okay, so this still doesn't have a public IP. This does have. So there's something about the existing configuration that is public. Thought I was typing project 3 with public IP. All right. So you can see it's pending. It's going to get into the initialization, but still it already has a public IP. All right, so let's connect. Doesn't have a connect button yet. There we go. So refresh that, and it's running. All right, so SSH dash I, and the private key is sept-2021.pem. The username is Ubuntu at the IP address. So I believe everyone understands how to connect to a server over SSH. So this should be your bread and butter. Like, you're going to be doing this a lot. Okay, so we're logged on the server now. So what we're going to do is we're going to start implementing our project 3. All right. Now, the end goal is to have an application that has a to-do app like that. So this is what it's going to look like. This is like any other advanced application. Like, even if it's a banking application or whatever application, the process and the way we do things is pretty much the same. For us to start from here before we imagine if I just started this whole masterclass and we go straight into how things are done right now, and you want to claim to have experience of this, all right? It doesn't make sense, because at least you want to be able to prove that you are able to understand how it has grown from years back until now. All right. And by the way, some organizations are still running like this till now. I mean, some really huge organizations, because when you deploy your application in a certain way, it's not easy to just migrate and move to another way just because that's how things are done now, just because it's modern. Cost organizations a lot of money, some millions of pounds or dollars to do migration projects. So some organizers actually stay this way for a very long time, decide to move things around. Okay, so this is still very, very relevant, important for future that you're going to start in. Okay, so this is the end goal. So let's click on next for the backend. So we're going to start going the back first, see how that looks, and then we can end, and then you begin to understand a little bit how all of this works, the whole 3-tier architecture, how it works. So the first thing we want to do is we want to update the app repository. So by now, if you've been on and you've been watching the Linux videos, you know what it stands for. It's the package manager that we use to install some Linux server. Okay, right. Okay, thank you. I will type in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sudo apt update, and I'll put the -y there so that it automatically accepts yes. Okay, so this is one that doesn't have an IP address, so I'm just going to delete that or test it now. I'll terminate the one that's we're using now. Okay. All right, cool. And this is the one that we need. So this is the IP address. So if anyone needs to get to the server, just get the IP address and let's follow along. You have the private key, so you can reuse the same key to get it. All right, what's the next thing we need to do? So there's difference in update and upgrade, right? So upgrade is just to upgrade the version of the applications that are already installed on the server. So there's a lot of apps on the server, and we can do that. Now, this is going to take a bit of time. So what I'd like to do is have this running and see what else we can do. So this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to explain this command here so that you don't just copy and paste, which is fine for now. Copy and paste all of these things you have, kind of about it. You just explain for now. So first of all, you know what curl does. I don't know what curl does. Let me go into, while I do that, if you know the answer to that, please type in the chat section. I'd like to connect to this instance on another terminal. Okay. I'm waiting for you guys to what does. We talked about this last week, right? So can someone tell me what curl does? All right, so my private key is in the desktop folder. So I have just seeded into that sh-I set Ubuntu address. So I'm logged into that. Oh, this is still upgraded. I thought I was not, because I know that takes a while. All right, so now curl here. If I just run curl without anything, you can see that it says curl -- manual for more information. So if I do curl -- manual, you can actually read a lot about what curl does and some of the exit codes and what you can do with it. There's a lot. So what I would do is, let's see if I can use the help. Okay. You can also do curl -a to give us a bit of help about the flag you can pass on to curl. I just want us to flags quickly. So dash S and capital to understand what's going on. So capital L says you can also use dash location. So if you don't use dash L, you can use location, and if redirects. So what it means is if there is a redirect, because you know that curl is used, you can use it to mission, thanks to him. You can use it to download. You can use to connect to another end. Just like we use SSH, you can use curl to connect to another endpoint, like FTP server or something. It does a whole, you can see the documentation itself is huge. Okay? Now, if there is redirect, so to say the endpoint that we're trying to get something from, if it's redirecting somewhere else, it's going to follow the redirect. Now the -S, let's look for that. S should be down. Okay. And by the way, is lowercase s, so there's capital S and lowercase s. So you can also use -- silent, and it means silent mode. So silent mode would mean if there's a debug to the output, it just runs in a silent mode so that you don't get too much verbosity onto the screen. Or silent mode could also be if it's prompting for you to put in data in, it doesn't prompt for that. So you can sort of put all this kind of information so that what you expect it to ask for, you've already provided that and it runs silently. Okay. Now, what we're trying to do, we're trying to download a script. So this is a script we're going to use to get the Node.js software. So we want to install Node.js. Remember what JS is? Node.js is JavaScript that are able to run on a device. JavaScript runs in the browser, like I explained before. But to run it on the server with Node.js, which is a programming language that we can use to develop an application, deploy it on the server. it runs on the server and it's able to do the business logic. Okay, we need to download that software. Okay, so to download it, there is a script provided. So we're trying to get this script and then execute that script on the server. So this is like doing two things in one command. We can either do it one by one, that means in 2 steps, and I'm going to show you that, or we can just run this one command that does it for us. Now let's see what this creates. So you can pretty much take this endpoint and put it in a browser, and it shows you the scripts. So if you know how to interpret a bash and go through this, you will see what it's doing. Okay, you don't have to. You don't get overwhelmed by all this. All right, you things like this. Okay, what if you will eventually write things like this? Let me tell you what. You're not going to sit down one whole thing. The reality is, whoever wrote this probably wrote it over a period of months and started with maybe just 5 lines. Okay, started with maybe 5 to 10 lines to do a bit of thing, and then as requirements change, it goes back into it and adds more code to it. Maybe there is like, can you still hear me? Because something happened just now. Don't know what it is. Oh, someone started sharing. So, all right. Can you guys still hear me though?
Yes, I can hear you. Hold on,
You
clear.
can hear me. Okay. So someone is sharing screen and then shouldn't be that. So I'm gonna stop you from sharing. Okay.
Yes.
And can you still see my screen? Oh, yeah? Okay.
No, I can't see us.
Oh, you can see my. Okay. So that's what happens. I noticed something happened. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. Please don't share your screen while I'm trying to explain things. Can you see screen now?
No, still come.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, my screen now. Awesome. Like I was explaining that, as you've seen, right, it may have taken several months to write. As a matter of fact, it may have work done by different engineers working collaboratively together to achieve this. So things like this, don't get overwhelmed to say, oh, this is such a long, I'm not ever going to be in a position to write something like this. Look, you will get to write something like this. You're going to sit down one day and write this whole code. And sometimes most of this code is copy and paste. You've already written functionality that does maybe a certain thing. It's about 10 lines of code. And you need to do something similar. All you're going to do is you copy that code, you paste, and you just change a few things. And by the time you do that, like for 4 or 5 different use cases, you're beginning to see your script becoming really tall and long. And then it seems like, oh, this is, if someone new sees that, they get overwhelmed. So just get overwhelmed, see things like this. Okay, it's very easy. And you can also do it to some extent. If you don't understand something, you can just pause a bit, research it. Say, for example, you see a command test. What does test mean? You can just go on Google and say bash. Know the language is bash. Bash test. Read up about it. There's information about everything. Even if you don't know how to apply it yet, try to understand it. Go back to scripts and just interpret it. You know what it is exporting an environment variable so that it can be reused somewhere down the line. So that anywhere you see Debian front end, it resolves to this environment. All right. So that's exactly what. And if you go through this code, all it's doing is just installing software the server. Okay. And before it does the install, it tests for things to test. wants to test if the OS version is the version that this Node.js application has to be, before it is to run, because it doesn't want it to break for you running the application. So the kind of things that happen, even though for the same functionality, it could have been just 5 lines. So, okay, it's not just to install. Okay, I'll just install it. Installation. But in a situation where someone is trying to install this same script on a Windows,
Recording in progress.
tool you can use to download file from the internet. So what do you get? And then I put this. So you get a command that you can use to download from the internet. So the same scripts I was just showing you now from the browser, I have downloaded it and do cat setup. You can see that's exactly the same code. Yeah, verify exactly the same. So I can then say, so to execute this, I can say, let's change the permission, because right now it doesn't have execute permission on this. So to make the file an executable. Now this you will understand, you have watched the Linux, because I mentioned permission on Linux. So you should be familiar with chmod command. You can do plus S, plus S, and then specify the file that we downloaded. I do this again, see that the color of that file has changed compared to that, and now we have read, write, execute. It didn't have execute here before. This is just read and write. Now there's the execute, and now we can execute the shell script. I can just do that by saying // specify the file and just do that. But actually, I need to do that with, as you can see, doing exactly what the script has been designed to do. Now, I didn't do, I can also copy this, run it directly on the server. Now, let me quickly say something about idempotency. These are dev terms you have to get familiar with. So before I run that, let me just quickly mention this idempotency meaning. So it says idempotency is the property of certain operations in mathematics and science where they can be applied multiple times. I believe. Let me just find that. Where they can be applied multiple times without changing the result beyond need.
Recording progress.
And then if I run it, it installs it. If I get to run the same script again, it shouldn't break the system. It should just not do anything. Okay, so that's what idempotency is all about, and we will be applying this a lot in everything that we'll be doing. So this script, I believe, is already idempotent, and that's why I can safely run it again, even though I have run it previously. Okay, so let me run that. As you can see, it's script again, but it's not going to break the system. All right. Otherwise, would have started seeing sorts of error. So that means multiple times, and we're good to go. So if this is correct, let me have a look at my chats on Slack to be sure that there is no new message. All right. So let's carry on. So now what we want to do is we want to do apt-get install node. So what we've done is we've actually done something to the system so that it's easy for us to run apt command to install Node.js. So we've not actually installed it yet. If we look at what's going on here, you can see here, just like I said, it does a number of things, saying confirming for call is supported. If it's supported, it goes ahead and does something. Doing another thing is saying adding the no signing key to your key ring on the server, verify what we're downloading. Okay, it gets the key and then
Request.